It'll be less temperamental. Um, in the meantime, I wanted to I wanted to start by talking a little again in historical terms. And unfortunately, now this is funny. Um, the Well, I'll get there in a second. So today we'll be reading from Mūlamadhyamakakārikā, the root verses of the middle way. We'll talk about that more in a second. In order to explain what these verses are and what is their significance, why were they composed, what do they mean, I thought it would be good to first go back to the sutras. There's another important distinction. We talked yesterday about the Tripitaka, the three baskets of Sutra, Vinaya, and Abhidharma. We can also broadly distinguish between Sutra and Shastra. Sutras are the discourses given by the Buddha. Shastras are commentaries written by scholars or whoever. Most of the rest of what we will be reading will be Shastras. And this is when we talk about the Buddhist science of logic, pramana, and so on. Generally speaking, these will be Shastras. However, there's, of course, a very close relationship between the two. And in the case of the Mūlamadhyamakakārikā, or MMK, as we like to condense, it's a particularly close relationship for reasons we will get to slowly. But first, I wanted to read from the Kanda Sutta, or the Skanda Sutra, which I sent out, sort of ideally we would have read before. If you did, great. If you didn't, and that's also totally fine. Repetition is a key element of really any kind of pedagogy, but especially in Buddhist pedagogy. Reciting sutras is a meritorious activity. It's encouraged. It's just one of these things that people have been doing for thousands of years, and there's great merit associated with it. So I will now recite the English translation of the Aggregates Sutra, the Sutra on the Aggregates. At Savatthi, there the Blessed One, that is the Bhagavan, the Buddha, said, "Monks, I will teach you the 5 aggregates and the 5 clinging aggregates. Listen and pay close attention. I will speak." "As you say, Lord," the monks responded. The Blessed One said, now what, monks, are the 5 aggregates? Whatever form, that is rupa, is past, future, or present, internal or external, gross or subtle, common or sublime, far or near, that is called the form aggregate, the rupa skandha. Whatever feeling is past, future, or present, internal or external, blatant or subtle, common or sublime, far or near, that is called the feeling aggregate, vedana skandha. Whatever perception, that is samñā skandha, is past, present, or future. Whatever mental fabrications are past, future, or present. Whatever consciousness is past, future, or present. These are called the 5 aggregates. And what are the 5 clinging aggregates? Whatever form, past, future, or present, internal or external, blah, blah, blah. This is a lot of repetition, right? This also aids in memorization. That is called the form clinging aggregate. Whatever feeling clingable offers sustenance and is accompanied by mental fermentation, that is called the feeling clinging aggregate, and so on for the others. So that is one of the earliest sutras, and you'll notice, in addition to the repetition, the presence of doctrinal categories that were later systematized in the Abhidharma, in particular, of course, the 5 aggregates. But just in terms of general format and the formula, where we have a location, thus have I heard, and the Buddha talks and the monks respond, and there's a little bit of a dialogue, but really it's an opportunity for discourse and teaching. So that, again, is one of the earliest sutras. Now we're going to skip ahead. This is the Heart Sutra, the longer Prajnaparamita Hridaya Sutra, which is a Mahayana Sutra, is one of the cornerstone Mahayana Sutras. It is a later sutra, and I want you to listen, and I want you to think as you're listening, how is this different from what we just heard? Thus have I heard. At one time, the Buddha was in Rajagriha, or Rajgir, on the mountain, along with a great sangha of bhikshus. At that time, the Lord Buddha entered the great, vast, and extremely profound samadhi. Within the multitude, Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva Mahasattva was practicing the profound Prajnaparamita, the perfection of wisdom, when he illuminated the 5 skandhas and saw that they all were empty and left all suffering and misery. Then Shariputra, by the power of the Buddha, joined his palms together in respect for noble Avalokiteshvara, Bodhisattva Mahasattva, and said, "Virtuous man, if there are those who wish to cultivate the extremely profound practice of Prajnaparamita, how should they cultivate practice?" After speaking thusly, Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva Mahasattva addressed Elder Shariputra, saying, "Shariputra, if virtuous men and virtuous women practice the extremely profound practice of Prajnaparamita, they should contemplate the 5 skandhas as empty of self-nature. Shariputra, form is not different from emptiness, and emptiness is not different from form. Form itself is emptiness, and emptiness itself is form. Sensation, conception, synthesis, these are different translations of the 5, right? And discrimination are also such as this. Shariputra, all phenomena are empty of characteristics. They are neither created nor destroyed, neither defiled nor pure, and they neither increase nor diminish. This is because in emptiness there is no form, sensation, conception, synthesis, or discrimination. There are no eyes, no ears, no nose, no tongue, no body, nor no thoughts. There are no form, sound, sense, taste, sensations, or phenomena. There is no field of vision, and there is no realm of thoughts. There is no ignorance, nor elimination of ignorance, even up to and including no old age and death, nor elimination of old age and death. There is no suffering. There is no accumulation of suffering. There is no elimination of suffering. There is no path. There is no understanding and no attaining. Because there is nothing to attain, Bodhisattvas rely on Prajnaparamita, and their minds have no obstructions. With no obstructions, they have no fears. Because they are far removed from backward dream thinking, their final result is nirvana. Because all Buddhas of the past, present, and future rely on Prajnaparamita, they attain Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi, the supreme, unexcelled supreme enlightenment, perfect enlightenment. Therefore, know that Prajnaparamita, the perfection of wisdom, is a great spiritual mantra, a great brilliant mantra, an unsurpassed mantra, an unequaled mantra. Because it can truly eliminate all afflictions, the Prajnaparamita mantra is spoken as thus: Gate, gate, para samgate bodhi svaha, meaning gone, gone, totally gone, completely, totally gone, awakening soha. Thus, Sariputra, all Bodhisattva Mahasattvas should practice Prajnaparamita thusly. At that time, after he had spoken, the Lord arose from the great, vast, and extremely profound Samadhi and praised Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva Mahasattva, saying, "Excellent, excellent, virtuous man, thusly, thusly, you have truly spoken. The extremely profound practice of Prajnaparamita should be practiced like this. When practicing thusly, each and every Tathagata is in approval," that is to say, each thus gone one, each Buddha. At that time, after the Lord had spoken, Elder Shariputra and Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva Mahasattva both experienced great bliss. Then the multitude of devas, humans, asuras, and gandharvas heard what the Buddha had truly said. With great bliss, they believed, accepted, and practiced in accordance. So, we notice several stylistic differences, yes? To begin with, now, there are some of the early sutras that are delivered by bhikshus and bhikshunis, in some cases, female and male renunciates that are not the Buddha, but this is very, very tiny minority. Mostly, the older sutras, the Pali sutras, are delivered by the Buddha himself. This is not the case for the Mahayana sutras, especially Prajnaparamita sutras, which, as you just heard, and this is the Heart Sutra, is called the Heart Sutra because it's like the condensed essence, the heart, right? Is given by Avalokiteshvara in Tibetan Chenrezig. Delivered, Shariputra, the sort of greatest disciple, requests Avalokiteshvara to give a teaching, and Avalokiteshvara gives the teaching, and the Buddha says, "That was a great teaching." So format-wise, it's quite different. And then content-wise, yes, also quite different. It's not, these are the aggregates and these are the cling, and then, when you cling to the aggregates, bad stuff happens. There are no aggregates. There's no form. There's no feeling. There's no thought. Form is empty of form. Rupa is empty of rupa. Vijnana is empty of vijnana. So what does that mean? Empty. We'll get there. The perfection of wisdom sutras, prajna paramita. So again, this is part of why I hammered yesterday this key term, prajna, yes? And the pure prajna, which is to say the perfect prajna, perfection of wisdom. The Buddhist perspective, the Mahayana Buddhist perspective, I should say, Theravadins would not necessarily accept this version of events. So the story goes, there was a Hindu Brahmin who attained, he was convinced by the Buddha Dharma, he took refuge, became a great teacher. The Nagas, which is to say the inhabitants of the Naga realm, these like snake people who live under the ground and under bodies of water. Sometimes you'll see Naga pujas. In Kathmandu every year they do a big Naga puja to try to, we pollute the water, we feel bad about it, we try not to pollute the water because that makes the Nagas upset and they call it sickness, so we clean things up and try to make things right with the Nagas. Naga princess in particular was very impressed with this very learned scholar monk. So she invited him to the Naga realm, where he went, and they had actually, the Nagas had these sutras, the perfection of wisdom sutras, sort of kept as a great treasure. These were not, as you can tell, these were not originally taught by the Buddha. They're quite different. So this great scholar went and he brought them back, the perfection of wisdom sutras, to the human realm. And ever since, he's been known as Nāgārjuna. And this is the author of the Mūlamadhyamakakārikā and many other texts besides. He is sometimes called a second Buddha. Our precious teacher's uncle, Chukyinima Rinpoche, is an emanation of Nāgārjuna, the abbot of the Rangjung Yeshe Institute in Kathmandu. There over which texts specifically Nāgārjuna himself composed and which were attributed to him after the fact, much like with Vasubandhu. This is, sort of, there's, you could sort of take whatever line you want to take on this. I personally, just as my personal opinion, I see no reason to doubt the overwhelming majority of ascriptions. Texts that are attributed to Nāgārjuna, I think for the most part, it's pretty clear were written by the historical Nāgārjuna. So, what?
Nāgārjuna time period?
Roughly 208, let's say. 200, give or take. A little before Vasubandhu, just a little. Roughly contemporaneous with Vasubandhu, let's say. So, we say MMK because there's 3 Sanskrit words in here. Mūla literally just means root, like of a tree. Karika is just the word for verses, like poetry verses. In the middle, haha, we have this word madhyamaka. Madhya is just directly related to the English word middle. You may have learned, I may or may not, I don't know, that the Buddha taught the middle way, right? This goes into the story of the Buddha's life and attainment of nirvana, right? Where after renouncing the palace life, he was sick of the palace and he saw there was more, but he didn't know what. So he renounced the palace and he went from, so the story goes, sort of unimaginable splendor, all the riches and sense pleasures that go along with being royalty, to starvation on the brink of death, right? He went famously to the forest encountered some ascetics, some wandering, yogi types who were practicing extreme asceticism, taking only a single grain of rice a day. And he was so weak and so thin, again, just starving on the brink of death, that his ribs were exposed. There's some very famous images you may see. Maybe Hillary can show when we do the art history unit. And then this a maid, a village girl, thought he was a ghost, thought he was a spirit of some sort, and brought him a little bowl of rice porridge. And he was not yet then the Buddha; he was still Siddhartha. Had it was a moment of like, oh, yes, the sense pleasures in the life of royalty is one extreme, but this is also an extreme. And so the Buddha taught the middle way, right? We don't indulge, and we don't push ourselves to the brink of starvation. We embrace the middle way. So if you can imagine, metaphorically, not in terms of practice, not in terms of, asceticism, but in terms of philosophy, or this great word that I like, ontology. In Greek, ontos, the ontos on, means that which exists, that which is real. Ontology is the study of existence, study of that which is. What does it mean for something to be real? So in terms of ontology, Buddhist ontology, Nāgārjuna in the Mūlamadhyamakakārikā set the tone for really, everything up to down to the present day. This is if you want to understand, in particular, the Mahayana Buddhist view of what it means for something to be real. It's not a question of it being simply existent or simply non-existent or both or neither, but a middle way, outside the scope, beyond gate paragate, right? Totally beyond any kind of conception of what it means to be existent or non-existent. And in particular, when we use this word that came up in the Heart Sutra, and again, the Heart Sutra is just a kind of condensation. If you read, you can read, there's 8,000 line Prajna Paramita, that's probably the oldest. There's 20,000, there's 100,000, there's 10 million verses. There's as many verses as you want in the Perfection of Wisdom, but they all kind of more or less are variations on the themes that we just heard a few moments ago. So when we say form, rupa, or whatever, vijnana, consciousness, or whatever, is empty of form, empty of itself. What does that mean precisely? It sounds nice maybe, but what does it mean? That's why I wrote this. Here you can see, and I apologize for all the Sanskrit, but I'm a Sanskritist, and Buddhist literature is often written in Sanskrit, and it'll help you to understand, even in English, what's going on in Sanskrit, right? So here we have the prefix sva, which most specifically means self. And you can even see the linguistic, again, Sanskrit's an Indo-European language like Latin and Greek and English and French and whatever. So, so you can see the linguistic relationship. It also, sva, as a prefix, can mean something like intrinsic. And you can understand, what it means for something to be self and for something to be intrinsic can be slippery. And then here I have three common, very common key technical terms that will come up again. Svalakshana is what we heard yesterday. Lakshana means characteristic. So a svalakshana is a self-characteristic or an intrinsic characteristic. So when we were talking yesterday about the intrinsic characteristics of dharmas, we're talking literally, and this is the word you will see if you read the Abhidharma in Sanskrit, is svalakshana. So, and in fact, this is I didn't mention it yesterday, but this is a good time. What is the etymology of dharma in Buddhist literature and in Sanskrit Buddhist literature? In fact, it is said because the Sanskrit root dur means to hold. So a dharma is that which holds its own characteristic. A dharma is that which has its svalakshana or holds its own svalakshana, has its own characteristic, has a self-characteristic, however you want to translate that into English. Now this other one, samvit, we're not going to talk too much today, but I wanted to put it on the board because it's svasamvit is the key term. This is sometimes so samvit, you could translate awareness. Yes? From vid, the root Sanskrit word vid, which is where we get like, it also means to see or observe. It also means to exist. We'll get there in a second. Also just to know. So wit, the English word wit, or the Vedas. What is the Veda? Is that which is known. So Veda, wit, vid. Samvit, some is just like an intensifier. So samvit is like, so this is awareness. So svasamvit, svasamviti is, you could say self-awareness, or I prefer reflexive. Sva is also a reflexive pronoun. Like he, you know, whatever, he touches himself. Yes, like a reflexive pronoun, himself. So svasamvit is reflexive awareness or self-awareness. We'll talk more about that later in the week. The number one that's the most important for today, best for last, is bhava, from the Sanskrit word root bu, cognate to the English be. Svabhava, self-existent, intrinsically existent entity, something like that, right? What is a svabhava? Is sometimes you could say self-nature, you will see, or just intrinsic nature. Self-nature, intrinsic nature, self-existent entity, something real is the idea. Svabhava. Now, in the packet that I provided, it's funny because I mentioned this thing about homages, yes, and there's a beautiful homage at the beginning of the Mūlamadhyamakakārikā, which in this otherwise excellent translation, maybe I cut it out accidentally, I don't know, and I don't have my computer, so I can't see, but I would say canonical English translation of the Mūlamadhyamakakārikā here by Sideritz and Katsura does not, unfortunately, I wanted to read the homage for everything and I didn't, it's not in chapter 1, which is whatever. Doesn't really matter. But yes, so the first verse of Nāgārjuna's Mūlamadhyamakakārikā, not from itself, not from another, not from both, nor without cause. Never in any way is there any existing thing that has arisen. And if you see on the packet, or if you look later on, you'll notice that the first two words are na svato, sva, not from itself. Yes, na pi parato, also not from anything else, nor from both, nor from neither. Verse 2, nahi svabhavo bhavanam. The intrinsic nature of existence, that is to say, the svabhava of bhavas. So the part of the reason, you know, Nāgārjuna is not just a great scholar, he's a great poet. And I like, one of the reasons, the English translation is very good. The commentary is also quite good. I highly recommend this. This is, as I said, the canonical English translation, as far as I'm concerned. You'll notice again in the second verse, nahi svabhavo bhavanam. So the svabhava, the intrinsic, there is no intrinsic existence. There is no, that which exists, bhavas, yes? From this part here, things that are real have no svabhava. That is a crazy thing to say. And I want to emphasize the absolute insanity of what Nāgārjuna and the Mahayana polemicists who popularized, who advocated for the perfection of wisdom literature and the Prajnaparamita how you got to put yourself in the mindset. And this is another reason why I wanted to emphasize yesterday the Abhidharma. And really, yesterday we were trying to get in the mindset of Buddhist scholars from 2,000 years ago, for whom Buddhist scholarship, the study of Dharma in a systematic, precise way, meant the study of Dharmas, meant the study in particular of the Svalakshanas and the Svabhava of Dharmas, learning the intrinsic characteristics, the inherent nature of the basic elements of reality according to the Buddhist worldview as it had existed up until this point for the, from the time of the Buddha for 500, 600, 700 years, something like that. So we had the Buddha around 486 BC by, common agreement is the Sri Lankan calendar. 500, 600 years later, Nāgārjuna comes around and he says, actually, dharmas have no svalakshana. Actually, dharmas have no svabhava. You have to understand how radical this is. It's not just, it may sound radical to us now in some ways, but it would be even more radical in its own time, in its own context. He is deliberately overturning the entirety of Buddhist scholarship as it had existed up until that point. And of course, in the second half of the second verse, he says, the intrinsic nature not occurring, neither is there any extrinsic nature found. What does that mean? What does any of this mean? It's very confusing, and I don't want to shy away from how confusing this might be. If you feel, I don't know, like this is like what's going on? What are we talking about exactly? Good. You should be confused. I don't want to detract from the radical power of these verses. In verse 3, the opponent, and it says like in square brackets, because it's understood and this is a common thing. You'll see this also, of course, in European literature, in Latin, and Thomas Aquinas. It's a very standard classical procedure where you do a sort of call and response, or you propose something and then you entertain an objection from someone you're sort of imagining you're speaking with, and sometimes it'll be direct quotes from some other text. Will just be reproduced. That's actually, as a side note, a very important source for scholars. A lot of material does not survive except as quotations in other works. So the opponent, who is an Abhidharmaka, Nāgārjuna in this text will argue against non-Buddhists, but his primary opponents are other Buddhists, in particular Abhidharmakas, Sarvastivada, people who maintain the traditional Sarvastivada Abhidharma picture. These are who Nāgārjuna is most directly arguing against, is other Buddhists. Yes? So the Buddhist opponent, the Abhidharmaka opponent, says there are 4 conditions: the primary cause, the objective support, the proximate condition, and of course the dominant condition. There is no 5th condition. No, I didn't get into any of that, but this is like standard Sarvastivada causal theory. Is we say there are 4 in the Sarvastivada, and in sort of general terms, even Mahayana Buddhists will say there, as a general matter, you could speak about 4 types of causal condition: primary, support, proximate, immediately preceding, and dominant. To which Nāgārjuna responds, an action does not possess conditions, nor is it devoid of conditions. Conditions are not devoid of an action, nor are they provided with an action. They are only said to be conditions when something arises dependent on them. When something has not arisen, why then are they not non-conditions? Something cannot be called a condition whether the object is not yet existent or already existent. If non-existent, what is it the condition of? And if existent, what is the point of the condition? So before we had to break, I wanted to sort of break that down, because that was really, for just speaking for me personally, that was the moment, that particular line of argumentation where it sort of clicked for me. So let's examine a time sequence of events. It could be helpful to think about this in terms of particles. That's how it was taught to me. I can do it that way now, but you could think of it as any kind of generic event, any type of cause, and any type of effect, so-called. So over here, we have a particle. Let's call it A, or whatever, some event. Baking bread. You have, dough, and you have a fire or an oven, right? So you have unbaked bread. We can call that the cause, unbaked dough, and baked dough, bread, or whatever. Again, it doesn't really matter. It's perfectly generic. In ordinary language, in ordinary thought, as we sort of go about our day, every day, in the world, in samsara, we speak as though when we have, let's say, one particle hits another particle. We do a little experiment in a particle collider in Switzerland. We could say, okay, this particle hits that particle. There's a moment, yes, of interaction. And then we have the cause, which is the earlier particle, and the effect, which is however it's changed. Or we have the dough and the bread. Yes? The thing is, if you pay really close attention, you will notice that at the time of the dough, there is no bread. And at the time of the bread, there is no dough. In fact, the bread and the dough are mutually exclusive. There is no point in time at which the bread and the dough coexist. There is no point in time at which the particle prior to its interaction and the particle after the interaction may be in any sense, in any physically, scientifically meaningful sense, spoken of as, quote unquote, the same particle. They are not the same particle, not any more than the bread is the dough. This is also why I was so insistent upon talking about momentariness yesterday. Again, in the Buddhist picture, the only things that exist, the only candidate things that exist are dharmas, which is to say things that hold their own characteristic. And they only exist for a single moment, 1/64th of a finger snap at the longest. So, where is the room to talk about causes and effects or conditions? Yes? Where is the room analytically, philosophically, scientifically, physically, mathematically? If all you ever have is a sequence of events, and at each individual moment, by definition, yes, by definition, what sense would it make to speak of a cause in the absence of its effect? We only designate things cause. I mean, I'm practically now at this point just quoting from, which is fine. We only speak, it only makes sense to speak of a cause in relation to effect. But by definition, at the moment of the cause, there is no effect. By definition, at the moment of the effect, there is no cause. So what we are talking about is a linguistic designation, is a, if you like to use kind of highfalutin language, a conceptual imputation. We are not talking about reality when we talk about causes and effects. We are talking about getting by in the world, using language to do things that we may need to do to survive. This is not to denigrate ordinary transactional existence. It is simply to point out that our pre-reflective way of thinking about things is very deeply mistaken and predicated on a picture of reality that's fundamentally wrong. Yes? Because, again, if all that exists only ever exists for at most 1/64th of a finger snap, then all of this narrative that we build up around it, all of the stories that we tell, this red folder, now, here, yes? I mean, from moment to moment, from 64th of a finger snap to 64th of a finger snap is not the same. To say nothing of, it's, but I don't look at it that way. I think this is the same red folder that what do you mean it's not this? I put my materials in it yesterday, and today I came and I picked it up. What do you mean it's not the same? So it's a very subtle kind of analysis, and it can be very confusing and perhaps even upsetting emotionally. I've seen people, myself even to some extent, it's a head trip, and I don't want to say that it's not or pretend that it's not, or this should be unsettling. You should be disturbed. Any questions before we head to break?
I've been reading some things about Edgar Cayce, a clairvoyant of the 1800s, who said a very interesting, he was called the sleeping prophet. He would sleep, he would meditate, and they would say he was sleeping. And he spoke about astrology. And he said, it's not that the astrology is predicting the cause and effect. It's that when we are in a situation, the stars are in this position that it's us influencing the world. And you can base your predictions on looking at these patterns, which is about looking at cause and effect. He had said, you're looking at it entirely wrong, that the placement of things around you cause these things. It's you and where you are that.
Yeah, I don't think it's in the material that I assembled for this class, but I'm very glad you mentioned that, because that is another really, really key concept. And if you hadn't mentioned that, I would have totally left it out. So thank you for mentioning that emptiness is interdependent. Emptiness and so one way that Nāgārjuna and the Buddhist tradition generally talks about emptiness is in terms of the absence of svabhava, absence of self-nature. What would it mean for something to have a self-nature? It would, among other things, it would mean for it to be causally produced. If it's not causally produced, then it's not real. But it can't be causally produced, so what are we even talking about? So that's one, and the main and the first way that emptiness gets talked about. The other, and not lesser, just elsewhere in the text, but it's not any less important, is as interdependence or interdependent origination. Emptiness and interdependent origination are synonyms. So yes, what does it mean for something to exist? To whatever extent we want to say that something exists, it means to be interdependently originated, which is to say inseparable from the rest of samsara, right? Yeah, not in fact, you can try to analyze, you can try to separate, you can get somewhere with it in conventional terms. But if we really want to analyze, if we really want to dig deep, what we find is that for something to exist means for it to be interdependent with all other phenomena throughout time and space.
Yeah.
And that is emptiness.
Yeah.
So thank you for bringing that up. origination, pratitya samutpada. Pratitya, so this is this word pratitya samutpada, which is when you talk about pratitya, that's the interdependent part. That's the same word when I talked about conditions earlier, pratyaya in Sanskrit. It's the same word, right? So we talk about when we talk about the 4 conditions from earlier, that's the same concept essentially. Great question, thank you. You had a
Yeah, I might be missing parts of this, but so is there a word for this impossibility? Is it, can you call it a paradox? Or, you know, it seems like, the fact that things can't exist, or you run into it everywhere you turn, as when you know, try to do. And I'm just wondering if is paradox a good word for it?
absolutely.
Is it ever resolvable?
So it depends on what a resolution would mean, is what I would like. What kind of resolution do you want? What I'll say briefly is Nāgārjuna is very metal. Like he doesn't take any prisoners. There's no he doesn't give you the kind of resolution that I think you seem to be asking for. In the Yogacara tradition, it's a little softer in that way. There's, as we'll see when we read the Madhyanta Vibhaga, there's another way of talking about emptiness that resolves the pair. It doesn't give quote unquote common sense realism any more ground than Nāgārjuna does. But from a more practitioner's kind of perspective, it does provide a kind of a resolution that I think you seem to be asking for. But we'll be reading that tomorrow. I think tomorrow. Yeah, tomorrow. Tomorrow. We'll be reading Madhyanta Vibhaga. Yes.
If we say that all particular things are empty of self, that they're not ultimately real, and that this is synonymous with pratitya samutpada, would it follow that the only ultimately real thing is the whole itself, all things together?
No, because where did that come from?
Yeah, hold on. So in the Abhidharma picture, we say that wholes are not ultimately real, only the parts, the dharmas. And what Nāgārjuna is doing here, it seems, is putting this picture on its head. Dharmas are not ultimately real. There are no individual things with their own intrinsic nature. But if there is to be some manner of reality whatsoever, in any sense, wouldn't it have to follow that the whole?
It's all right. Take your time. This is a good chance for a break. I'm happy to entertain, and we can also talk after, but I think this is a good chance for people to stretch their legs, sort of try to process what just happened, and we'll come back in 10 minutes. That was chapter 1, or the key points. And then I think it's chapter 17, where Linda's great question about interdependence comes up. That's not reproduced here. I picked the last. Well, there are other additional chapters in discussion over what, but thematically, I would say the final 2 chapters, which are 24 and 25 of the Mūlamadhyamakakārikā. Not going to read them in their entirety. Great material to look over if you have time today, tomorrow, whenever, or just at your house after the retreat. I am just going to read, because this also gets into, I think, Peter's point. So again, Buddhist interlocutor, someone that is let's imagine a crusty old monastic professor of Abhidharma studies at Nalanda who's just shocked and outraged and appalled by the errant nonsense that Nāgārjuna is saying. Objects. If all this is empty, there is neither origination nor sensation. It follows for you that there is the non-existence of the Four Noble Truths. Comprehension, abandonment, practice, and personal realization. None of these is possible due to the non-existence of the Four Noble Truths. And due to the non-existence of those, the Four Noble Fruits of Stream Winner, Once Returner, Never Returner, and Arhant do not exist. If the fruits are non-existent, then there are neither the strivers nor the attainers of those fruits. The Sangha does not exist if the 8 kinds of person do not exist. And because of the non-existence of the Noble Truths, the Noble Dharma does not exist either. Dharma and Sangha being non-existent, how will the Buddha come to be? In this way, you, Nāgārjuna, you deny all 3 jewels when you proclaim emptiness. You deny the real existence of the karmic results, both good and bad actions, and all worldly modes of conduct. To which Nāgārjuna replies, here we say that you do not understand the point of emptiness, emptiness itself and the meaning of emptiness. In this way, you are thus frustrated. The Dharma teaching of the Buddha rests on 2 truths, conventional and ultimate. Those who do not understand the distinction between the 2 truths do not understand reality in accordance with the profound teachings of the Buddha. The ultimate truth is not taught independently of customary ways of talking and thinking, and not having acquired the ultimate truth, nirvana is not attained. Emptiness misunderstood destroys the slow-witted, like a serpent wrongly held, or a spell wrongly executed. Now I'm going to pause there for a moment. The other sutra that I sent in advance, which you may or may not read, again, good reading material whenever, there's a simile of the snake, where the Buddha himself, in the earliest Pali suttas, uses the example that Nāgārjuna repeats here of a serpent wrongly held. What does this mean? So, in ancient Indian medicine, as in contemporary Western medicine, the line between poison and medicine is not always, it's a manner of speaking, or it's a question of dosage. Oxygen is toxic in high enough concentrations. Some of the most potent medicines are made from snake venom. How do you extract venom from a snake? You got to hold its head really carefully, and you got to squeeze its fangs. And you can squeeze the fang, and you can extract the venom, and you can make very good medicine from this. And this is how they make antivenoms and other medicines. To this day, this is another also very important metaphor for Tantra, right? Again, this line between poison and medicine, it's a truism, is something Derrida gets up to in I think in Margins of Philosophy, but for Plato as well, the Greek word pharmakon, from which we get, pharmacology, etc. Pharmakon, in like the hemlock that Socrates drank as his method of execution was a pharmakon. What's a poison? What's a medicine? So, if you hold a serpent very carefully by its head and you very carefully squeeze, you can extract very potent medicine. If you hold it by the tail, like an idiot, it can reach around and bite you and you will die. Yes, of course. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because when I train horses, I see people getting stepped on.
Yeah.
And I say, don't put your foot in front of the horse's foot. his next step is gonna be. You know, and this concept of familiarity of, anyways, it's.
No, it's an excellent point. And again, the same thing actually. So the mantra is the word he uses. And this again is just as Tukul Mikmar was teaching yesterday in the story of Milarepa, right? Magic spells can be used for great destruction, or you can use the same mantras as part of tantric yoga practice. It's all about intent, skill in execution. So the point here is, yes, if we misunderstand emptiness, if we treat it as a license, well, nothing's real anyway, so it doesn't really matter what I do or don't do. That is the snake that bites us, right? So it's a very subtle point, requires great care. I will continue. Hence, the sage's intention to teach the Dharma was turned back, considering the difficulty for the slow of penetrating this Dharma. Moreover, the objection that you make concerning emptiness cannot be a faulty consequence for us or for emptiness. All is possible when emptiness is possible. Nothing is possible when emptiness is impossible. That gets back to the dependent origination bit, yes? If phenomena are not dependently originated, then they cannot function. If they're not dependently originated, then they're not empty. So nothing at all can move, nothing at all can change. It is the absence of self-nature that allows for change, that allows for anything at all to happen.
It's constant. Well, our awareness is constant in dealing with this.
Awareness
Yes.
is the sum bit that I said we're going to talk about tomorrow. Good question. Effect and cause, as well as agent, instrument, and act, arising and ceasing, and fruit, all these you thereby deny. Dependent origination we declare to be emptiness. Emptiness is a dependent concept, just that is the middle path, madhyama. There being no dharma whatsoever that is not dependently originated, it follows that there is also no dharma whatsoever that is non-empty. If all this is non-empty, there is neither origination nor cessation. It follows for you that there is the non-existence of the Four Noble Truths. So here, Nāgārjuna has turned the objection on its head. You, Mr. Krusty Abhidharmaka, you say emptiness is bad or whatever, that this, that, what is it, when you say rupa is empty of rupa, that you are somehow betraying the Buddha Dharma. This is the accusation being leveled against Nāgārjuna. And Nāgārjuna says, no, no, no. If rupa were not empty of rupa, then there would be no path. There would be no Four Noble Truths. It's the emptiness of all phenomena that allows for the Four Noble Truths, that allows for the path, that allows for the cessation of suffering. How will suffering come to be if it is not dependently originated? Indeed, the impermanent was declared to be suffering, and it does not exist if there is intrinsic nature. This is a sort of subsidiary point that I haven't really emphasized, but I'll mention it now. Yeah, this is another part of analysis. So we talk about svabhava, self-existence, intrinsic existence, inherent nature. If bread has an intrinsic nature as bread. Now, if we don't take this seriously, if we just say, okay, we just use words loosely and we don't really care, then whatever, but what are we doing here? If we do take words seriously, if we do say, okay, Mr. Platonist, there is an intrinsic nature of the bread. Why is it bread? Because it has an intrinsic nature of bread, because it has a Platonic form, let's say, idea of bread. Plato himself would have said, these do not change. How could the intrinsic nature, how could the form, capital F, of bread ever change? How could it mold? How could it come to be in the first place? If bread had the intrinsic nature of bread, wouldn't it have always had to have been bread? How could it have been dough? Makes no sense. And this is why, yes, in verse 21, chapter 24, it says, indeed, the impermanent was declared to be suffering, and it does not exist. There is no impermanence if there is intrinsic nature, if there is svabhava. How will something that exists intrinsically arise again? Therefore, the arising of suffering does not exist for one who denies emptiness. So you, Mr. Krusty Abhidharmika, who denies the emptiness of dharmas, you have no way to account for the first noble truth. Where does suffering, if suffering has the intrinsic nature of suffering, then it can never change to non-suffering, it can never cease. And if it doesn't have the intrinsic nature of suffering, then how could it arise? How could that which is not suffering, how could an experience which doesn't have the intrinsic nature of suffering acquire the intrinsic nature of suffering? There is no cessation of suffering, the third noble truth that exists intrinsically. You deny cessation through your maintaining intrinsic nature. The practice of a path that exists intrinsically is not possible. But if this path is practiced, then you must say it does not have intrinsic nature. When there is neither suffering nor the arising and cessation of suffering, then what kind of path will lead you to the cessation of suffering? In the same manner, abandonment, personal realization, and practice, like comprehension, are impossible for you, and so too are the four fruits. For those holding that there is intrinsic nature, if the lack of acquisition of the fruit is intrinsic, how would it be possible to acquire it later? If the fruits are non-existent, then there are neither strivers nor attainers of those fruits. So if you, whoever, had a real personal identity, because that's also what this is about, right? At a certain, we're talking about there is no self. What is a self? Self is an intrinsic nature of a person, right? Or we say there's some quantity of five aggregates, there's some quantity of particles, physical particles, molecules, and cognitions and feelings. They're all sort of put together. And that's what we call a person, Pudgala in Sanskrit. Okay, let's grant that for the sake of argument. If you are not a Buddha, but you have an intrinsic nature, then your intrinsic nature is not a Buddha. So how could you ever attain Buddhahood? And because of the non-existence of the noble truths, the true Dharma does not exist either. Dharma and Sangha being non-existent, how will a Buddha come to be? And it follows for you that there can even be a Buddha not dependent on enlightenment. Because if a Buddha has the intrinsic nature of being a Buddha, then what is the possible relevance of practicing the path? Buddha is Buddha whether there's a path or not. In fact, as we've seen, it makes no sense to talk about causes and effects. So if we want to describe enlightenment as an effect, then we're already just we've blown the whole picture up. It follows for you as well that there can even be enlightenment not dependent on a Buddha, because there's an enlightenment has the nature of enlightenment and Buddha has the nature of Buddha, and these are independent, right? One who is unenlightened by intrinsic nature, though that one strives for enlightenment, will not, according to you, attain enlightenment in the course of the Bodhisattva's practice. Moreover, no one will ever perform either good or bad actions. What is there that is to be done with regard to the non-empty? For what has intrinsic nature is not done. And I want to skip ahead. So that's the point, let's say, of chapter 24. Chapter 25, an analysis of nirvana, is where it all sort of comes together. Objection, again, from a Buddha, crusty Abhidharmaka. If all this is empty, there is neither origination nor cessation. Due to abandonment or cessation of what is nirvana then acknowledged? To which Nāgārjuna replies, if all this is non-empty, there is neither origination nor cessation. Due to abandon or cessation of what is nirvana then acknowledged? Not abandoned, not acquired, not annihilated, not eternal, not ceased, not arisen. Thus is nirvana said to be. Nirvana is not, on the one hand, an existent, which is to say, he used the word bhava. Nirvana is not a bhava. If it were, its having the characteristics of old age and death would follow, for there is no existent, no bhava, devoid of old age and death. And if nirvana were an existent, nirvana would be conditioned, for never is there found any existent that is not conditioned. And if nirvana were an existent, he doesn't, of course, nirvana famously is unconditioned, yes? And if nirvana were an existent, how could one say that nirvana is non-dependent? For never is there found any existent that is non-dependent. If nirvana is not a positive existent, how will nirvana be an absence? Where there is no existent, there is no absence. And if nirvana is an absence, how can nirvana be non-dependent? There is no absence that exists without dependence. That which, when dependent or conditioned, comes into and goes out of existence, that, when not conditioned or dependent, is called nirvana. And the teacher taught the abandonment of coming into and going out of existence. Thus, it is correct to call nirvana neither existent nor an absence. It is not to be asserted that the Buddha exists beyond cessation, nor does not exist, nor both exists and does not exist, nor neither exists nor does not exist. None of these is to be asserted. Indeed, it is not to be asserted that the Buddha exists while remaining in the world, nor does not exist, nor both exists and does not exist, nor neither exists nor does not exist. None of these is to be asserted. There is no distinction whatsoever between samsara and nirvana. There is no distinction whatsoever between nirvana and samsara. What is the limit of nirvana? That is the limit of samsara. There is not even the finest gap to be found between the two. The views concerning what is beyond cessation, the end of the world, and the eternality of the world are dependent respectively on nirvana, the future life, and the past life. All dharmas being empty, what is without end? What has an end? What is both with and without end? What is neither without end nor having an end? What is identical? What is distinct? What is eternal? What is non-eternal? What is both eternal and non-eternal? And what is neither? This halting of cognizing everything, the halting of, now Siddhartha and Katsura uses this very interesting Greek word, hypostatizing, meaning reifying, turning into a concretizing, let's say. The halting of concretizing, the halting of reifying is Shiva, blissful. I think that's a pun, by the way. He's sort of, sticking it to the Shaivas. No dharma whatsoever was ever taught by the Buddha to anyone. I'm going to repeat that. Last line of functionally the last chapter of the Mūlamadhyamakakārikā. No dharma whatsoever was ever taught by the Buddha to anyone. Questions? Yeah.
The Buddha himself say that in the Diamond Sutra?
Diamond Sutra is Prajnaparamita literature. It's a great question. No need to apologize. We got 10 minutes. Or not, whatever. Call it there.
It sounded like a description of God.
There's this great word, another great Greek word, apophatic. There's a distinction in Christian theology between apophasis and kataphasis, like to speak. So yeah, there's this sense, and there's a God famously is radically beyond any human ability to conceptualize. So there's this problem. We can attempt to use positive language, but this necessarily falls short. So there's a very rich tradition of not even trying.
Not necessarily related to the verses.
It's fine.
But sort of response speaking to those people that Nāgārjuna's
definitely, especially as it was related to something like cessation or origination or rising. Like, look, the reason that we're having this conversation, that you think about being able to become enlightened, demonstrates that,
The ignorance. Yeah.
yeah,
Like you're
just that we're having this conversation proves my point.
exactly. Exactly. It's a radical, I'm doing a bit, but I'm also like, I think there's a tendency to want to defang Madhyamaka sometimes, and it's the wrong approach. This is supposed to be profoundly unsettling.
We just do the triple flip.
Mm.
No.
No, yeah, no safety net, no safety net. Yeah. Seems like we're good, so we can call it a day, and we can discuss if you have, yeah, or
So, I do want to press this point because I'm not happy, but
Dukkha.
Hmm.
That's dukkha right there.
it's dukkha. So looking at it from the parts then, so we don't say that even though book doesn't have intrinsic nature, there is no such thing as book simplicity, right?
Okay.
So that, okay.
Good. Yeah.
Seems to me that when the work that student not simply saying a philosophical point, but this whole language and this whole poetic writing is it's a heuristic device.
Absolutely.
So I guess like how when reading something like this, because it's not meant to be read as
No, it's not like, yeah, it's the textbook or even Kant sort of sitting in his study, and again, I nothing against Kant, but it's a very different style. Yes. Yeah, definitely. Or did you have sorry.
other than the point that like later commentators have out of it.
Why would you trust later commentators?
Process and you're looking at this versus process instead of looking at the points. The points like you were
What do you mean?
true points.
Well, I think one answer to that question is, again, Nāgārjuna is very metal. He doesn't care. So, like, in a sense, there's not much to go on, which, like, is a double, like, I could expound at length about the intellectual history of Madhyamaka. I have very, very sharp opinions. I'd rather not, at least not here, because I am firmly of the opinion that the text really speaks for itself and is best. Not that there isn't a value. There's certainly a value in later commentators, as you said, and I think that again, Sidderitz and Katsura's I took this directly from their book, from the ebook, and their commentary is quite good, generally speaking, and you should read it, and probably will get something out of it. But don't mistake that for like, yeah, like the what's actually going on. It's he's using language to deconstruct language in a very violent way, in a sense.
Exactly. So for me it's kind of hard to grasp in the first
Good.
place.
Oh, you don't you doubt that. Good. Good. So then I would encourage you in particular So traditionally in Buddhist praxis, you talk about study, contemplation, and meditation. Yeah. So what we did here, what I would say is the study, and then what you just described is the like sitting with that would be the contemplation and the meditation. And really, yeah, sit next time maybe if you want on the cushion and like really analyze like who's sitting on what is this cushion? Where did it come from? What does it mean for this to be a cushion? Why do I think of this as a thing that was here yesterday and is going to be here tomorrow? Hillary, you had to.
That too, I've seen, for example, Thomas Donald, who is.
Very much my yeah.
But he does this sort of experiential thing where you take the chapter, say, on coming and going, very famous chapter.
Chapter 2.
Yeah, chapter 2, and you actually try to get up and analyze what's happening when you're walking across the room. To really, really sort of take it apart. Can you?
Where is the going? Where is it?
Yeah.
Such a, I think religious studies will say this kind of scripture.
Yes.
So you're encountering it. So reading it is a active engagement,
Right.
A conversation almost between the text and the
the
reader.
Yeah.
So where's the, I guess, the philosophy of it?
He is an anti-philosopher. I mean, this is like, why are you philosophizing? Why do you want to philosophize? Where is that coming from? Yeah, very much so.
Nāgārjuna is a Mahasiddha, and he is laying out a path becoming a Mahasiddha. So there's an outer and an inner and a secret dimension of Nāgārjuna
Sure.
as well, that where we even stop worrying about what he's doing with language. We stop worrying about how he's using language or ideas to deconstruct language and ideas, but rather how does this work on the inner and secret level, which I obviously
That part is, even though it's such an individual and personal process for each individual reader to encounter this text and read it, for something is working, that everybody's sort of on the same page while reading it, and like the old monasteries read all sorts of texts, so something's working.
But what? Again, this is and tomorrow will be a little bit of a reprieve, I think, because the Yogacara tradition has a very rich account of emptiness that I think it's just a little easy. Yeah, it's not quite so off-putting in that way.
my favorite emoji or word thing in the new iOS is jitter.
Jitter.
Yeah, so you can say Nāgārjuna, you put that in a text, and you tell the text effect to jitter.
Yeah. Okay, that's cool. Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
Like that's what Nāgārjuna.
Yeah.
It's more about independent origination.
Which aspect?
Is there some kind of? I think I have an incomplete picture. Do things arise in reliance on one another? Just, I can't even articulate the question. Can you just give a little bit more exposition?
Sure. The classical source is the Stalk of Grass Sutra, where the Buddha takes literal grass stalk and he shows the monks and he says, because this exists, that exists. Because that exists, this exists. So that's the kind of early sutra picture that then feeds into the Abhidharma formalization in terms of those 4 conditions that we talked about. So for the crusty old Abhidharmakas that Nāgārjuna is making fun of, interdependent origination is really about those 4 conditions that we mentioned early on. And these are not super precisely delineated. It's part of why he's kind of deconstructing that whole way of thinking about things. For Dharmakirti, and this will come up, this will be, on Thursday, Friday, more relevant. Dharmakirti really zeroes in on the immediately preceding condition, samanantara pratyaya. Not exclusive, because there's like what even is an immediately preceding condition gets tricky. There's a particular, like when we're talking about awareness, cognition, some of it, that's going to be more, that you can talk about it more precisely. And we'll get into that. But as a general matter, talking about like bread and particles or whatever, yeah, you're talking, again, famously, was sort of when you talk about the grass stalk, yes? The supporting conditions would be things like sunlight and water and soil. Classically, although it's not exactly immediate in a temporal, like for Dharmakirti, he's really talking about like one moment, like is it a moment, like a finger snap moment, 64th of a finger snap moment, and then the next moment, right? That's immediately preceding. For the Abhidharmakas, like you could, in a more loose sense, talk about the seed as the immediately preceding condition of the stalk versus the soil and the sunlight and so on. So when we're talking about, and I guess that's the kind of, maybe this will help answer your question without giving you the precise kind of answer that you want, which I don't think is possible. In general terms, especially in the earlier literature, in the Abhidharma literature, when we talk about dependent origination, really we're just talking about causal processes in a kind of general sense. We're talking about, yes, the seed does not produce a sprout in the absence of sunlight and water and soil. The sprout does not exist in the absence of the seed. And by extension, or sort of using that as a metaphor, the result of cessation is not attained without the cause, which is the path.
Also, relationship between like an observer.
That's that awareness part in the Dharmakirti stuff that we're going to be talking about on Thursday and Friday.
Is there any kind of dependent relation that obtains between two concurrently existing objects?
How would that work?
Well, we say, everything is connected somehow. What exactly does that mean? We're just talking about.
It means they're empty. You just hear we no longer could read the verse again.
They're connected in sense.
Yeah, the emptiness is dependent origination. We could read it again if we want. It means they're empty.
It's all shared.
You're asking me to give you a kind of answer that I'm resolutely opposed to giving you.
I could say things.
That's time. Thank you.